The storm came like the wrath of God himself, tearing across the Arizona territory with a fury that split the heavens and shook the earth. Lightning carved jagged scars across the black sky, and thunder rolled like cannon fire over the desert plains. When the tempest finally broke just before dawn, it left behind more than muddy arroyos and scattered tumbleweeds. It left behind bones. Cole Maddox rode toward the old church as the first pale light crept over the mesa, his horse stepping carefully through the storm's debris. The abandoned sanctuary had stood empty for 12 years, its adobe walls crumbling like the faith that once filled its pews. But something was different now. Where the storm's fury had carved a deep channel behind the church, the earth had given up its secrets. A skeletal hand reached toward the sky, pale fingers still wrapped around a tarnished silver cross. The bones were small, delicate, a woman's remains half buried in the red earth. Cole's breath caught in his throat as recognition hit him like a physical blow. He knew those bones. He'd tried to forget them for 12 long years. Sister Graciela, the nun who'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispered rumors and unanswered prayers. Cole dismounted with shaking hands, his weathered face pale as parchment. The guilt that had gnawed at his soul like a cancer suddenly blazed fresh and raw. He'd helped bury this secret once. Now the desert itself was dragging it back to light. Some things buried in the desert always find a way back to the light. He whispered to the morning wind, his voice cracking with the weight of old sins. He reached for his shovel, desperate to cover the bones again, to push the past back into darkness where it belonged. But the sound of approaching hoofbeats froze him mid-motion. 2 riders crested the rise, Sheriff Asa Finch's familiar silhouette, and beside him, a stranger in a dark riding coat. Cole's hand moved instinctively to his gun, then stopped. Running would only confirm his guilt. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and waited for his past to finally catch up with him. The storm had done more than expose old bones. It had torn open a wound that would bleed the whole town dry before the truth was finally told. Cole Maddox had been living with ghosts for 12 years. They haunted his dreams, whispered accusations in the desert wind, and stared back at him from every bottle of whiskey he'd emptied trying to forget. At 43, his once black hair was streaked with premature silver, and lines of guilt had carved themselves deep into his sun-weathered face. The townspeople of Sanctuary knew him as a hero, the rancher who'd stood against Apache raids, who'd saved lives and property with his quick gun and quicker thinking. They didn't know about the blood on his hands, or the lies that built his reputation. Sheriff Asa Finch was a different kind of haunted man. At 58, he carried the weight of keeping peace in a town that sat on the knife's edge between civilization and chaos. His badge was tarnished from years of hard use, and his conscience bore stains that no amount of honest work could wash clean. Finch had made compromises, told himself they were necessary, that the greater good sometimes required smaller evils. But late at night, when the desert wind howled through Sanctuary's empty streets, he wondered if he'd crossed lines that no lawman should cross. The woman who rode beside him that morning was a mystery wrapped in determination. She called herself Lucia Morales, claimed to be a correspondent for the Territorial Gazette. But there was something about her that didn't quite fit. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, a deep, penetrating blue that seemed to see through lies and pretense. She was perhaps 28, with the kind of quiet beauty that could be easily overlooked until she spoke. Then her intelligence blazed like a signal fire, sharp and undeniable. Lucia had arrived in Sanctuary 3 days earlier, asking questions about the missing nun carrying a worn leather satchel filled with newspapers, clippings, coded letters, and a determination that made grown men uncomfortable. She spoke Spanish, like a native Apache, well enough to trade with the scouts, and had an uncanny ability to read between the lines of official reports. What the townspeople didn't know was that her fingers bore calluses from hours of weapons training, and her knowledge of military protocols went far beyond what any reporter should possess. Sweet Jesus. Sheriff Finch breathed as they approached the exposed grave. His weathered hands gripped the reins, tighter knuckles white with tension. "Is that Sister Graciela?" Lucia said quietly, dismounting before her horse had fully stopped. She moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to gathering evidence, her storm blue eyes taking in every detail of the scene. Just as I expected. Cole watched her with growing unease. There was something familiar about those eyes, about the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. A memory stirred in the depths of his guilt-addled mind, but he couldn't quite grasp it. "You know about the nun?" Cole asked, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. Lucia knelt beside the skeletal remains, her movements betraying military training. "I know many things, Mr. Maddox. The question is, what do you know about how she ended up here?" Sheriff Finch climbed down from his horse with the stiff movements of a man carrying too much weight on his shoulders. "Now hold on, miss. This here's official business. Official like the report you filed 12 years ago." Lucia interrupted, producing a small silver rosary from her coat pocket. The metal caught the morning light, throwing tiny rainbows across the red earth. The one that claimed Sister Graciela simply vanished. No body, no evidence of foul play. Cole's face went white. He recognized that rosary. He'd seen it around Sister Graciela's neck countless times. Lucia stood, her hand moving unconsciously to a concealed weapon at her hip. "Sister Graciela didn't just vanish, gentlemen. She was murdered. And I intend to prove it." The words hung in the desert air like a death sentence. Cole felt the familiar weight of his Colt .45 at his hip, but he knew bullets couldn't kill the truth that was rising from the earth like a vengeful spirit. "You want the truth?" Cole said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful what you dig up." Lucia reached into her satchel and withdrew a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. Sister Graciela's personal diary. Hidden for 12 years, but not destroyed. She opened the book to reveal coded entries, numbers, and symbols, arranged in patterns that looked random to the untrained eye. But Lucia's fingers traced the marks with familiarity, her lips moving silently as she translated the cipher. "What's it say?" Sheriff Finch asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Lucia's face had gone pale, her storm blue eyes reflecting a mixture of triumph and horror. "It's evidence of treason. Someone was selling Union military secrets to Confederate sympathizers and Apache war chiefs. Sister Graciela discovered the network." Cole's mouth went dry as desert sand. "That's impossible. The war's been over for 7 years when she disappeared." Lucia finished. "But fortunes built on blood money don't just vanish when the shooting stops. They find new ways to profit from conflict." She carefully folded a coded letter and tucked it inside her coat. "This explains why she had to die." Sheriff Finch stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun butt. "You can't just make accusations without proof." Lucia reached deeper into the diary and withdrew a folded piece of paper, a hand-drawn map of the territory, marked with dates, locations, and cryptic symbols. Some of the locations were circled in red ink, others crossed out entirely. This map shows the routes used to smuggle information and weapons. It also shows where meetings took place, where money changed hands. Lucia's finger traced one of the red circles, including several meetings right here in Sanctuary. Cole's blood ran cold as he recognized some of the marked locations. His own ranch was circled along with the sheriff's office and the old church. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted his growing panic. A group of townspeople crested the ridge, drawn by the commotion and the sight of the sheriff's horse. At their head rode Jeremiah Watts, the town's unofficial leader and owner of the largest mercantile. His face was flushed with excitement and righteous anger. "Sheriff Finch," Watts called out as he dismounted. "We heard there was trouble. Found some old bones, did you?" Word had already spread through Sanctuary like wildfire. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered around the exposed grave, their voices rising in a mixture of curiosity, anger, and fear. Cole watched their faces change as they recognized the nun's habit clinging to the skeletal remains. "That's Sister Graciela," breathed Martha Henley, the schoolteacher. "Sweet Lord, what happened to her?" "Apache," snarled Tom Brennan, a former cavalry sergeant with a particular hatred for the native tribes. His scarred face twisted with familiar rage. "Had to be Apache. Probably tortured her for trying to convert them. The Apache didn't kill my sister," Lucia said loudly, her voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. The crowd fell silent, turning to stare at her. Cole felt the world tilt off its axis. "Your sister," Martha Henley whispered. Lucia's storm-blue eyes blazed with sudden fury. "Graciela Morales was my sister, and she was murdered for trying to expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of territorial government." The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Jeremiah Watt stepped forward, his merchant's instincts sensing opportunity in the chaos. "Now see here, miss. You can't just ride into our town making wild accusations. We know Cole Maddox. He's a hero, built on lies." Lucia interrupted. "His reputation, his wealth, his standing in this community, all of it built on blood money and covered up with the bones of a holy woman." Tom Brennan's hand moved to his gun. "You lying bitch. Cole Maddox saved this town more times than I can count. From Apache raids that were orchestrated." Lucia replied, her own hand moving to her concealed weapon. "From attacks that certain people knew were coming because they helped plan them." The crowd began to murmur again, uncertainty replacing their initial anger. Cole could see doubt creeping into their eyes, could feel the fragile piece of sanctuary beginning to crack. "Folks," Sheriff Finch said, raising his hands for quiet, "let's not jump to conclusions. This here's a crime scene and we need to handle it proper. Handle it like you handled it 12 years ago." Lucia asked, producing a military button from her pocket brass with the distinctive eagle of the Union Army. This was found clasped in Graciela's hand. She tore it from her killer's uniform as she died. The crowd pressed closer to examine the evidence, their voices rising in excited whispers. Cole recognized the button. He'd seen its like on dozens of uniforms during the war. "Could be anyone's," Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Could be," Lucia agreed. But combined with this, she produced a spent cartridge case, its brass tarnished with age. It paints a clear picture. Springfield rifle standard issue for Union cavalry officers, not the kind of weapon Apache typically carried. Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. "The woman speaks truth." Everyone turned to see a lone figure approaching on foot, a Chiricahua Apache scout, his weathered face grave with purpose. He moved with the fluid grace of a man at home in the desert, his dark eyes taking in the crowd with cautious intelligence. "Nietzsche," Sheriff Finch breathed, recognizing the scout. The Apache came to a stop at the edge of the crowd, ignoring the hostile stares directed his way. He was a man in his 40s, lean and hard as rawhide, with graying hair bound in traditional braids. "I knew the holy woman." "Nietzsche," said his English, careful but clear. "Sister Graciela was friend to my people, brought medicine when soldiers brought death. She did not deserve what happened to her." Brennan's gun was halfway out of its holster. "You red bastard, if you had anything to do with—" "I had nothing to do with her death," Nietzsche interrupted. "But I know who did." The crowd fell silent, waiting. Cole felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. "The night she died," Nietzsche continued, "I was watching from the mesa. Saw riders in the moonlight, heard voices carried on the wind. Saw the holy woman fighting, trying to escape. Saw her killer's face in the firelight." "Who?" Lucia pressed her voice tight with emotion. Nietzsche's eyes moved to Cole, then to Sheriff Finch, then back to the crowd. "A man in uniform. A man with authority. A man who swore to protect, but chose to profit instead." The words hit the gathering like thunderbolts. Cole felt the weight of every eye in the crowd, felt the pressure building like steam in a boiler. "We all got ghosts," he said finally, his voice carrying across the desert stillness. "Question is, which ones will we finally face?" The crowd's mood shifted like desert wind, uncertainty giving way to ugly suspicion. Cole watched faces he'd known for years harden with doubt, saw neighbors who'd once called him friend begin to back away. "Now, this is insane." Tom Brennan snarled, his scarred face twisted with rage. "You're all listening to lies from a savage and some woman who shows up with wild stories. Cole Maddox is a goddamn hero." "Is he?" Lucia asked quietly. She'd positioned herself with her back to a boulder, her hand never far from her concealed weapon. "Tell me, Mr. Brennan, how exactly did Mr. Maddox always know when Apache raids were coming? How did his ranch survive untouched while others burned?" "Because he fought them," Brennan roared. "Because he's got more courage in his little finger than you've got in your whole lying body." But doubt was spreading through the crowd like poison. Cole could see it in their eyes, hear it in their whispered conversations. Martha Henley stepped forward, her schoolteacher's voice cutting through the tension. "Lucia, Miss Morales, what exactly are you accusing Cole of?" "I'm accusing him of being part of a conspiracy that has been selling military intelligence to Apache war chiefs for over a decade," Lucia replied. "A conspiracy that murdered my sister when she got too close to the truth." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Jeremiah Watts, ever the opportunist, sensed the changing mood and adjusted his position accordingly. "Now that's a serious charge," he said, his merchant's voice carefully neutral. "Mighty serious indeed. If it's true, then we've all been deceived. But if it's false..." He let the implication hang. Cole found his voice at last. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple." Brennan interrupted, his gun now fully drawn. "Tell these people the truth, Cole. Tell them you never sold information to the Apache. Tell them you never betrayed your own kind." The silence stretched like a taut rope. Cole looked at the faces around him. People he'd known for years, people whose respect he'd craved, and whose trust he'd betrayed. The truth was a luxury he couldn't afford, but lies had become too heavy to carry. "The truth," he said slowly, "is more complicated than any of you know." Brennan's face contorted with rage. "Complicated, Jesus Christ, Cole, it's yes or no. Did you or didn't you sell information to the Apache?" Before Cole could answer, the sound of running horses echoed across the desert. 3 riders were approaching fast from the direction of town, and their urgency obvious even at a distance. "More trouble," Sheriff Finch muttered, shading his eyes against the sun. The riders resolved into recognizable figures. As they drew closer, Deputy Marshal Pete Carson and 2 men Cole didn't recognize. Carson's face was grim as he dismounted, his badge catching the morning light. "Sheriff," Carson said, his voice tight with tension. "We've got problems, big problems." "What kind of problems?" Finch asked. "The kind that involves military intelligence and dead federal agents," Carson replied. He gestured to the 2 strangers. "These gentlemen are from the territorial government. They've been tracking some missing documents related to a certain missing nun." Lucia's face had gone pale. "What kind of documents?" One of the strangers, a lean man with the bearing of a professional soldier, stepped forward. "The kind that could start a war, miss, or end one depending on who gets their hands on them." He introduced himself as Captain James Morrison, Territorial Intelligence. His companion remained silent, but his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging faces and positions with military precision. "We have reason to believe," Morrison continued, "that sensitive military information has been compromised. Information that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could destabilize the entire territory." "And you think this information is connected to Sister Graciela's murder?" Lucia asked. We know it is, Morrison replied. The question is who else knows about it. His eyes swept the crowd lingering on Cole and Sheriff Finch. We're going to need to question everyone who was close to the deceased. Starting with you, Mr. Maddox. Cole felt the trap closing around him. Military intelligence officers didn't just show up by coincidence, someone had called them. Someone who knew more about the conspiracy than they were letting on. I think, he said carefully, we all need to have a conversation. A private conversation. I think you're right. Morrison agreed. Sheriff is there somewhere we can talk without interruption. Finch nodded toward the town. The jail's got cells, but it's also got walls. We can talk private there. As they prepared to leave, Tom Brennan stepped forward, his face still flushed with anger and confusion. This ain't over, Cole. Whatever's going on here, whatever you've done, it ain't over. No, Cole agreed, looking back at the exposed grave where Sister Graciela's bones lay in the morning sun. It's just beginning. The ride back to Sanctuary was tense and silent. Cole could feel the weight of secrets pressing down on him like an avalanche. 12 years of lies were about to catch up with him, and he wasn't sure he was ready for the reckoning. But as he watched Lucia's determined profile and saw the quiet strength in Nietzsche's weathered face, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the truth was worth fighting for after all. The storm had started something that couldn't be stopped. Now they would all have to live with the consequences. The Sanctuary jail squatted like an adobe fortress in the center of town, its thick walls scarred by years of hard use. Sheriff Finch led them through the front door, past the empty cells to his private office in the back. The room smelled of tobacco sweat and the particular desperation that came from too many hard decisions. Captain Morrison closed the door and posted his silent companion as a guard. Now then, he said, settling into a chair across from Cole. Let's discuss what really happened to Sister Graciela. What do you know? Lucia asked, her storm blue eyes intense. We know that Sister Graciela was more than just a nun, Morrison replied. She was a Union intelligence operative assigned to investigate war profiteering and corruption in the territories. Cole felt his stomach drop. A spy, a patriot, Morrison corrected, and a very effective one. She'd been tracking a network of traitors who were selling military secrets to Confederate sympathizers and Apache war chiefs. The same network that killed her, Lucia said. We believe so. What we don't know is the identity of the network's leadership. Sister Graciela called them the Judas Trinity in her report's 3 key players who controlled the operation. Morrison produced a folder from his coat, spreading documents across Finch's desk. We know one was a military officer with access to intelligence reports. Another was a civilian with connections to both Apache tribes and territorial government. The third was a law enforcement official who could manipulate investigations. Sheriff Finch's face had gone white as paper. Jesus Christ, he whispered. Something to add, Sheriff? Morrison asked. Finch looked around the room, his eyes desperate. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told someone 12 years ago. Go on. The night Sister Graciela died, I received a message. Anonymous. It said there was trouble at the old church, that I needed to come alone. Finch's voice was barely above a whisper. When I got there, she was already dead, and there was a man standing over her body. Who? Lucia demanded. A captain. Army intelligence. He showed me his credentials, told me that Sister Graciela had been working for Confederate agents, that her death was justified. Finch's hands were shaking. He ordered me to dispose of the body, to file a report saying she'd simply vanished. And you did it, Cole said, understanding dawning. I did it. God help me, I believed him. I thought I was protecting the territory from a traitor. Finch looked up, tears streaming down his weathered face. I buried her behind the church and told the town she'd disappeared. Morrison was making notes, his face impassive. Can you describe this captain? Tall, lean, with a scar across his left cheek. Spoke like an educated man, but there was something cold about him. Something... Finch struggled for the word. Evil. Lucia had gone rigid in her chair. What was his name? Harlan. Captain Eli Harlan? The name hit the room like a thunderbolt. Morrison's pen stopped moving, and his professional composure cracked for just a moment. Captain Harlan, he repeated slowly. You're certain? I'll never forget that name, Finch replied. Or that face. Morrison stood abruptly, moving to the window to peer out at the street. Gentlemen, Miss Morales, we have a problem. A very serious problem. What kind of problem? Cole asked. The kind where Captain Eli Harlan has been my superior officer for the past 3 years. Morrison replied. The kind where he's currently in charge of this investigation. The implications hit them like a physical blow. If Harlan was part of the conspiracy, if he was one of the Judas Trinity, then their investigation had been compromised from the beginning. We need to get word to Washington, Lucia said urgently. Alert the proper authorities. The proper authorities sent me here. Morrison interrupted. On Captain Harlan's orders. He knows we've found Sister Graciela's body. He knows about the evidence. As if summoned by their words, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the street outside. Morrison peered through the window, his face grim. Speak of the devil, he muttered. Captain Harlan with a full detachment of soldiers. Cole moved to the window, seeing a dozen mounted soldiers surrounding the jail. At their head rode a man who matched Finch's description, exactly tall, lean, with a distinctive scar across his left cheek. We're trapped, Lucia said, checking her concealed weapon. Not yet. Naiche spoke for the first time since entering the jail. The Apache scout had been silent, listening, but now his dark eyes held a dangerous gleam. There are ways out that soldiers do not know. What do you mean? Morrison asked. Tunnels. Cole said, understanding immediately. The old mine shafts connect most of the buildings in town. They were used during Apache raids when people needed to move unseen. Can you find them? Morrison asked Naiche. I can find anything in this desert, the Apache replied. Question is, where do we go once we're underground? Before anyone could answer, Captain Harlan's voice boomed through the jail's front door. Sheriff Finch, I know you're in there with the suspects. Open up immediately. Suspects, Lucia muttered. He's going to arrest us. Morrison said grimly. Probably charge us with interfering with a military investigation. Once we're in his custody, we disappear, Cole finished, just like Sister Graciela. The front door of the jail exploded inward as Harlan's soldiers used a battering ram to force entry. Heavy boots echoed through the building as they spread out, searching systematically. The basement, Finch said urgently. There's a trap door behind the filing cabinet. They moved quickly, pushing aside furniture to reveal a narrow wooden door set into the floor. Below lay darkness and the musty smell of old tunnels. Sheriff Finch. Harlan's voice was closer now, just outside the office door. I'm ordering you to surrender the fugitives immediately. Go, Finch whispered, pushing Lucia toward the trapdoor. I'll try to stall them. Asa, Cole said, if you stay, he'll kill you. Maybe. But if I run, he'll hunt down everyone in this town looking for answers. Finch straightened his shoulders. Some debts have to be paid. There was no time to argue. One by one, they dropped through the trap door into the tunnel system below. Cole went last, pulling the heavy cabinet back over the entrance, just as Harlan's men burst into the office. In the darkness beneath Sanctuary, surrounded by the ghosts of old mining operations and older secrets, Cole Maddox prepared for the fight of his life. The conspiracy that had killed Sister Graciela was still alive, still powerful, and still willing to murder anyone who threatened its secrets. But this time he wouldn't face it alone. The tunnel system beneath Sanctuary was a labyrinth of abandoned mine shafts, natural caves and passages carved by decades of desperate men seeking silver and gold. Naiche led them through the darkness with the confidence of someone who'd studied every map and passage, his feet silent on the rough stone floor. How far do these tunnels extend? Morrison asked, his military training making him catalog escape routes and defensive positions. They connect every major building in town, Cole replied. Church, bank, hotel, even some of the larger residences. The miners were thorough. They emerged into a larger chamber that had once been a mining junction. Ancient timbers supported the ceiling, and the air smelled of old earth and forgotten dreams. Lucia moved to examine markings on the walls, symbols and numbers that seemed to follow some kind of pattern. These aren't mining marks, she said, her voice tight with excitement. They're coded messages. Morrison joined her at the wall, his eyes widening as he recognized the significance. Sister Graciela's communications network. She was using the tunnel system to move information without detection. More than that. Lucia continued following the symbols deeper into the chamber. She was mapping the entire conspiracy. Look at this. She'd found a section where the rock wall had been carved with an intricate diagram. Names, dates, and connections that formed a spider web of corruption. At the center of the web were 3 positions marked with symbols: a crown, a sword, and a scale. The Judas Trinity. Morrison breathed. She identified all 3. Cole studied the diagram, his blood running cold as he recognized some of the names. These are all real people. Territorial officials, military officers, influential businessmen. And they're all connected to the arms dealing and information selling, Lucia added. But look at this. She pointed to recent additions to the diagram, carved in a different hand. Someone's been updating the network, adding new players. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of boots and shouting voices. Harlan's men were conducting a systematic search of the jail, looking for any trace of their escape route. We need to keep moving, Morrison said. Where does this tunnel lead? To the church, Naiche replied. But also to something else, something you need to see. He led them deeper into the tunnel system, following passages that grew narrower and more treacherous with each step. The air grew colder, and Cole could hear the sound of running water echoing through the darkness. They emerged into a natural cave that predated the mining operations, a sacred site that the Apache had used for generations. But it had been converted into something else entirely, a communications center. Telegraph equipment lined one wall, connected to wires that disappeared through cracks in the rock. Tables held maps, documents, and what appeared to be a complex decoding apparatus. Most shocking of all was a large safe, its door standing open to reveal stacks of gold coins and official documents. Sweet Jesus, Morrison whispered. This is their headquarters. Lucia was already examining the documents, her face growing pale as she read. These are recent reports from last week. Someone's been using this place regularly, who, Cole asked. According to these communication logs, Lucia replied, someone calling himself the Shepherd. The name sent chills down Cole's spine. The leader of the Trinity. More than that, Morrison said, examining the telegraph equipment. This is military-grade communications gear. Whoever the Shepherd is, he has access to the highest levels of territorial government. A new voice echoed through the cave, cold and amused. Very perceptive, Captain Morrison. They spun around to see a figure emerging from a hidden passage, Captain Eli Harlan, his scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. Behind him came 2 soldiers with rifles trained on the group. "Oh, Captain Harlan," Morrison said, his hand moving slowly toward his sidearm. Harlan warned. "Hands where I can see them, all of you." They raised their hands, helpless, in the face of superior firepower. Harlan approached the telegraph equipment with the familiarity of long use. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said, gesturing around the cave. "Sister Graciela discovered this place by accident 12 years ago. She thought she'd found our communications center." His laugh was bitter. She had no idea she'd stumbled into something much larger. "You killed her," Lucia said, her voice shaking with rage. "I defended American interests," Harlan replied. "Your sister was an idealist who couldn't understand that sometimes peace requires the appearance of war." "What do you mean?" Morrison demanded. Harlan moved to the safe, withdrawing a leather portfolio. "The Apache Wars, Captain. Do you really think they've continued this long by accident? Do you think the raids, the massacres, the ongoing violence just happened?" The truth hit Cole like a physical blow. "You've been orchestrating it, all of it. Managing it," Harlan corrected. "Keeping the conflict at precisely the right level to justify military presence, to generate defense contracts, to maintain the emergency powers that make certain activities possible." "You son of a bitch," Morrison snarled. "You're talking about treason." "I'm talking about progress," Harlan replied. "About building an empire in the shadows while the politicians play their games in Washington." He opened the portfolio, revealing documents that made Lucia gasp. "Miss Morales, did you really think you were working alone? Did you think a simple reporter could access the kind of classified information you've been gathering?" "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice lacked conviction. "Oh, my dear Lucia," Harlan said with mock sympathy. "You're not Sister Graciela's sister seeking revenge. You're Lieutenant Lucia Morales, Union Army Intelligence, assigned to this investigation by your superiors in Washington." The revelation hit the cave like a thunderbolt. Cole stared at Lucia, seeing the truth written in her storm-blue eyes. The woman he'd begun to trust, the grieving sister seeking justice, was actually a trained operative. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Lucia's face crumpled. "Yes. But Graciela really was my sister. Everything I told you about that was true, except the part about being a reporter," Morrison said grimly. Except that she agreed. Harlan was enjoying their confusion. "The beautiful irony, Miss Morales, is that you were sent here to investigate the very network that recruited you. Your superiors in Washington, at least some of them, are part of the conspiracy you've been hunting." "That's impossible," Morrison protested. "Is it?" Harlan moved to the telegraph key, beginning to tap out a message. "Let me show you just how deep this goes." The reply came within minutes, and Harlan read it aloud with obvious satisfaction. "Orders confirmed. Eliminate all witnesses. Make it look like Apache attack. Signed, Colonel William Hayes, Military Intelligence Division." The name meant nothing to Cole, but Morrison's face went white. "Hayes is my commanding officer. He's the one who sent me here. He's also one of the Shepherd's most trusted lieutenants," Harlan revealed. "In fact, Colonel Hayes was the one who suggested you for this assignment, Captain Morrison. He wanted someone he could trust to clean up any loose ends." The betrayal was complete. They'd walked into a trap that had been years in the making, orchestrated by people they'd trusted with their lives and careers. "What do you want?" Cole asked. "What I've always wanted," Harlan replied. "To protect the network, to eliminate threats, and to continue building the empire that will one day control the entire Western territories." He gestured to his soldiers. "Take them to the surface. We'll stage their deaths at the church, make it look like they were killed trying to desecrate holy ground." As the soldiers moved to comply, Naiche spoke for the first time since entering the cave. "There is something you should know about Apache beliefs, Captain." "What's that?" Harlan asked, amused. "We believe that every place has a spirit, and the spirit of this place is very, very angry. Before Harlan could respond, Nietzsche threw himself at the nearest soldier, his knife appearing in his hand like magic. The cave erupted in violence as Cole and Morrison followed suit, desperately fighting for their lives in the confined space. In the chaos that followed, Lucia managed to grab some of the documents from the safe. As gunshots echoed through the underground chamber, she realized that their only hope of survival lay in exposing the conspiracy before Harlan could eliminate all the witnesses. The fight in the cave was brutal and desperate. Nietzsche's knife found its mark in the first soldier's throat, but the second managed to get off a shot that ricocheted off the stone walls, sending deadly fragments flying through the chamber. Cole tackled Captain Harlan, both men crashing into the telegraph equipment in a tangle of fists and fury. Morrison grappled with the remaining soldier, their struggle sending maps and documents scattering across the cave floor. "The tunnel," Lucia shouted, stuffing the stolen documents into her coat. "We have to get out of here." Above them, they could hear more soldiers entering the tunnel system. Harlan had come prepared for resistance, and reinforcements were already moving through the underground passages. Nietzsche was bleeding from a bullet graze across his shoulder, but his eyes burned with deadly purpose. "This way," he said, leading them toward a passage that seemed to disappear into solid rock. "Where does it go?" Morrison asked, helping the wounded Apache scout. "To the old Spanish mine workings," Nietzsche replied. "Deeper than the others know." They plunged into the narrow passage as shouts echoed behind them. Harlan was alive and furious, organizing his men for a systematic hunt through the tunnel system. Captain Morrison." Harlan's voice boomed through the underground chambers. "You can't run forever. I have men at every exit." The passage they followed grew smaller and more treacherous, forcing them to crawl through sections barely wide enough for a human body. The air was thick with dust and the oppressive weight of countless tons of rock overhead. "How much farther?" Cole gasped, his shoulders scraping against the tunnel walls. "Not far," Nietzsche replied, though his voice was strained with pain and exhaustion. They emerged into another chamber, this one showing evidence of much older excavation work. Spanish colonial tools lay scattered about, and religious symbols had been carved into the walls by conquistadors seeking gold centuries earlier. But it was what they found in the center of the chamber that took their breath away. Sister Graciela's real grave. Unlike the scattered bones they discovered behind the church, this burial site had been carefully prepared. The body lay in a simple wooden coffin, surrounded by personal belongings and documents that had been preserved in the dry desert air. "My God," Lucia whispered, kneeling beside the coffin. "She's been here all along." "The bones at the church," Morrison said, understanding dawning. "They were planted. A decoy." Cole agreed. Harlan knew someone would eventually come looking for her. He wanted to control what they found. Lucia was examining the documents that surrounded her sister's body. "Look at this," she said, her voice shaking with excitement. Graciela's final report, the complete evidence against the conspiracy. The papers were covered with meticulous notes, detailed maps, and what appeared to be transcriptions of overheard conversations. But most importantly, there were photographs, images of meetings, document exchanges, and clear shots of the conspiracy's leadership, including the shepherd. Morrison breathed, studying one of the photographs. "Jesus Christ, I know this man." "Who is it?" Cole asked. "Territorial Governor Marcus Whitman," Morrison replied. "I've met him twice at official functions in Phoenix." The revelation was staggering. The conspiracy reached to the very top of territorial government, controlled by a man with the power to influence policy across the entire Southwest. "We have to get this evidence to Washington," Lucia said, gathering the documents. "To people we can trust." "Who can we trust?" Cole asked. "If the conspiracy reaches this high, how do we know who's loyal and who's been bought?" Before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Harlan's men had found their trail. Time to go. Nietzsche said, pointing to another passage that led deeper into the Spanish workings. "Oh, where does that lead?" Morrison asked. "To the surface," Nietzsche replied. "But not where they expect." The passage Nietzsche led them through was a nightmare of loose rock, sudden drops, and spaces so narrow they had to remove their gun belts to squeeze through. The Spanish miners had been desperate men following veins of silver wherever they led, regardless of safety or structural integrity. "How do you know about these tunnels?" Morrison asked as they struggled through a particularly tight section. "My grandfather worked for the Spanish," Nietzsche replied. "Before the Apache wars, before the hatred. He told me stories of the deep places, the hidden ways. Behind them, they could hear Harlan's soldiers following their progress, slower but relentless. The captain was nothing if not thorough, and he had the resources to mount a prolonged search. They emerged into a cavern that opened to the sky through a natural chimney in the rock. Sunlight streamed down from above, and Cole could see blue sky through the opening. "How do we get up there?" he asked. Nietzsche was already examining the walls, looking for handholds. "Carefully," he said. "The rock is old, unstable." As they prepared to climb, Lucia spread out Sister Graciela's documents, studying them by the natural light. "There's something else here," she said. "Something I missed before." "What?" Cole asked. "A list of names. People who've been eliminated over the years." Her voice was grim. 17 individuals who got too close to the truth. Morrison joined her, reading over her shoulder. "Most of these are military personnel. Officers who asked too many questions, enlisted men who saw things they shouldn't have, and civilians." Cole added, recognizing some of the names. "Ranchers who refused to sell their land, newspaper editors who wrote unfavorable articles. They've been killing people for over 15 years, Lucia said, building their empire on a foundation of bodies." The sound of voices echoed up from the tunnel below. Harlan's men were getting closer. "Time to move," Morrison said. "We can analyze the evidence once we're safe." The climb to the surface was treacherous. The rock was weathered and brittle, breaking away under their hands and feet. Nietzsche went first, testing each handhold before trusting his weight to it. They were halfway up when disaster struck. Morrison was climbing directly below Cole when a section of rock gave way, sending the captain tumbling back into the cavern. He hit the stone floor with a sickening crack, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "Morrison," Cole called down, but the captain was unconscious. "Leave him," Nietzsche urged. "The soldiers are almost here." "I'm not leaving anyone else to die," Cole replied, starting back down toward the injured man. "Cole, don't," Lucia said urgently. "If they capture you, then they capture me, but I won't run away again." He reached Morrison just as Harlan's soldiers burst into the cavern. The captain's men immediately took cover, training their rifles on the climbing party. "Surrender." Harlan's voice boomed through the chamber. "You're outnumbered and trapped." Cole looked up at Lucia and Nietzsche, still clinging to the rock wall above. "Get out of here," he called to them. "Get that evidence to Washington." "I'm not leaving you," Lucia replied. "You have to. Your sister died for this information. Don't let her sacrifice be meaningless." For a moment, the cavern was silent, except for the echo of distant gunshots from somewhere else in the tunnel system. Then Harlan himself appeared at the bottom of the chimney, his scarred face twisted with rage. "Mr. Maddox," he said conversationally. "Still playing the hero, I see. Someone has to—" Cole replied, checking Morrison's pulse. The captain was alive but badly injured. How noble, how pointless. Harlan gestured to his men. "Kill them both." "Wait." Lucia's voice echoed down from above. "I have something you want." She was holding up the documents they'd found, with Sister Graciela's body visible to everyone in the cavern. "Your sister's evidence," Harlan said with interest. "Yes, I do want that. But I can get it from your corpse just as easily." "Can you?" Lucia asked. because these aren't the only copies. The bluff was weak, but it gave her time to continue climbing. Cole used the distraction to drag Morrison toward a pile of rocks that might provide cover. "Shoot her down," Harlan ordered, but Lucia and Naiche had already disappeared through the opening above. The captain's rage was terrible to behold. "Search every building in town," he snarled at his men. "Find them, kill them, and burn anything they might have touched." He turned back to Cole, his hand moving to his sidearm. "As for you, Mr. Maddox, your heroic days are over." The shot echoed through the cavern like thunder, but it wasn't Harlan who fired. Sheriff Finch stood at the tunnel entrance, his smoking gun trained on the captain's chest. Harlan looked down at the spreading red stain on his uniform, then up at the sheriff with surprise. "Should have stayed bought Asa," he said, then collapsed to the cavern floor. "Should have stayed honest," Finch replied. "Too late for either of us now." The remaining soldiers were caught off guard by their commander's sudden death. In the confusion that followed, Cole managed to get Morrison to cover, while Finch held them off with precise rifle fire. "How many more are there?" Cole asked as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. "Too many," Finch replied grimly. "Harlan brought a full company. They've surrounded the town." "Then we're finished." "Maybe. But Miss Morales and Naiche got away with the evidence. That's what matters." Above them, the sound of gunfire echoed through the chamber opening. The battle for Sanctuary had begun in earnest. The surface of Sanctuary was chaos. Harlan's soldiers had taken positions throughout the town, turning the peaceful settlement into a war zone. From their position in the cavern below, Cole could hear the rattle of rifle fire and the shouts of men fighting for their lives. "We have to get up there," he said, helping Morrison sit up against the cavern wall. "Can't walk." Morrison gasped, his face pale with pain. "Legs broken bad." "Then we stay here until—" "No." The captain's voice was stronger despite his injury. "Those are my men up there. Soldiers I trained led into battle. They don't know they're fighting for the enemy." Sheriff Finch was reloading his rifle, keeping one eye on the tunnel entrance, where more of Harlan's men might appear at any moment. "What are you thinking, Captain?" "I'm thinking someone needs to tell those soldiers the truth about their orders," Morrison replied. "Someone with enough rank to make them listen." Cole understood immediately. "You want to surrender to them. I want to talk to them. Man to man, soldier to soldier." Morrison struggled to his feet, using the cave wall for support. "These men aren't traitors. They're following orders from a superior officer. If they knew the truth, they'd help us fight the real enemy." Finch finished. The plan was desperate, but it was better than sitting in a cave while the town burned above their heads. Cole helped Morrison toward the climbing route, knowing that getting the injured man to the surface would be nearly impossible. They were saved by an unexpected development. Tom Brennan's voice echoed down through the chamber, opening harsh with authority. "You men down there. This is Sergeant Major Brennan, late of the 7th. Cavalry, throw down your weapons and come up with your hands visible." Cole looked up to see Brennan's scarred face peering down at them, a rifle in his hands. Behind him were several townspeople, all armed and looking ready for a fight. "Tom," Cole called up. "Morrison's hurt bad. We need to get him to the surface." "What about those soldiers?" Brennan asked, gesturing toward the men who'd been pursuing them. "Dead or scattered," Finch replied. "Captain Harlan's finished." It took 20 minutes to get Morrison to the surface, using ropes and pulleys improvised from mining equipment. When they finally emerged into the sunlight, Cole was shocked by what he saw. Sanctuary was under siege, but it wasn't the one-sided massacre Harlan had planned. The townspeople had rallied using their knowledge of the local terrain to mount an effective resistance against the soldiers. Rifle fire crackled from rooftops and windows, and the streets were littered with debris from the ongoing battle. "What happened?" Cole asked Brennan as they took cover behind an overturned wagon. "Your Miss Morales happened." Brennan replied with grudging admiration. "She and that Apache scout reached the town just as Harlan's men were moving into position. started shouting about conspiracies and government corruption, waving around official-looking documents. And people believed her. People remembered what they heard at the gravesite this morning, about military buttons and rifle cartridges and Apache taking the blame for things they didn't do. Brennan's voice was grim. Turns out folks had been harboring suspicions for years. They just needed someone to give them permission to act on them. Morrison was lying on a makeshift stretcher, his face gray with pain, but his eyes alert. "Sergeant Major," he said to Brennan, "I need you to gather any soldiers you can find. Bring them here under a flag of truce." "Sir, those men are following illegal orders from a traitor. They have a right to know the truth before they die for a lie." Brennan looked skeptical, but he nodded. "I'll try, Captain. But they're pretty worked up right now." As Brennan disappeared into the chaos of the ongoing battle, Cole found himself alone with Morrison and Finch. The sheriff was keeping watch while the captain examined the documents Lucia had recovered from Sister Graciela's real grave. "This is it," Morrison said, his voice filled with awe. "Everything we need to bring down the entire network. Names, dates, financial records, photographs, it's all here." "If we live long enough to deliver it," Finch observed. "We will," Cole said with more confidence than he felt. "We have to." The battle raged for another hour before Brennan returned with unexpected news. He'd managed to convince 3 junior officers to meet under a flag of truce, and Morrison's revelation about Captain Harlan's treasonous activities had shaken them badly. "They want proof," Brennan reported. "Something more than just accusations." Morrison handed him one of Sister Graciela's photographs, a clear image of Harlan meeting with known Apache war chiefs, money changing hands in broad daylight. "Show them this," he said, "and tell them that their captain was selling military secrets to the enemy for over a decade." The photograph had the desired effect. Within minutes, the shooting began to slack off as word spread through Harlan's command structure. Soldiers who had been following orders without question suddenly found themselves questioning everything they'd been told. By sunset, the battle for Sanctuary was over. The soldiers who had come to massacre the town instead found themselves helping to tend the wounded and restore order. The truth once revealed had proven more powerful than Harlan's lies. But the larger conspiracy was still out there, and Cole knew their fight was far from over. As he watched Lucia tend to Morrison's injuries, her storm blue eyes reflecting the last light of day, he realized that everything had changed. The storm that had exposed Sister Graciela's bones had also exposed the corruption that had poisoned the territory for over a decade. Now it was time to cut out that corruption at its roots, no matter how high it reached or how powerful its defenders might be. The truth had set them free. Now they had to use that freedom to ensure justice was finally done. The makeshift hospital in Martha Henley's schoolhouse buzzed with quiet activity as Dr. Samuel Carson, summoned from the next town over, worked to save Captain Morrison's shattered leg. Outside, the people of Sanctuary moved through their damaged town, like ghosts still trying to comprehend the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Cole sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching Lucia as she organized the evidence they'd recovered. Sister Graciela's documents were spread across several tables, meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced with Morrison's own intelligence files. "How bad is it?" he asked, gesturing toward the papers. "Well, worse than we imagined," Lucia replied without looking up. "The conspiracy reaches into at least 6 territories, involves dozens of high-ranking officials, and has been operating for over 15 years. Sheriff Finch approached, carrying a telegraph message that had just arrived from Phoenix. His face was grim as he handed it to Lucia. "From the territorial capital," he said. "Governor Whitman is demanding answers about the terrorist attack on Sanctuary." Lucia read the message, her storm blue eyes hardening. "He's claiming that Apache raiders attacked the town, killed Captain Harlan and his men in a cowardly ambush." "Son of a bitch is trying to control the narrative," Cole observed. "More than that," Lucia said, pointing to another section of the telegram. He's ordering martial law for the entire territory. Military tribunals for anyone involved in inciting rebellion against lawful authority. The implications were staggering. If Whitman succeeded in imposing martial law, he could have them all executed as traitors before the truth ever reached Washington. "How long do we have?" Finch asked. "According to this, territorial militia units are already mobilizing. They'll be here within 3 days." Lucia set down the telegram, her face reflecting grim determination. "We need to get this evidence to the federal authorities before Whitman can silence us permanently." "Who can we trust?" Cole asked. "If the conspiracy reaches as high as we think, how do we know who's loyal?" "We don't," Morrison said from the doorway. The captain was leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, his leg immobilized in a wooden splint. "But we know someone who's been fighting this conspiracy from the inside." "Who?" Lucia asked. "General William Tecumseh Sherman," Morrison replied. "He's been conducting his own investigation into territorial corruption. Harlan mentioned him once, said the shepherd considered Sherman their greatest threat." Cole felt a surge of hope. Sherman was a war hero, a man whose integrity was beyond question. If anyone could be trusted with their evidence, it was him. "How do we contact him?" Lucia asked. Morrison pointed toward the telegraph office, which had miraculously survived the battle unscathed. "Direct wire to military headquarters in Washington. If we can get through." They were interrupted by the approach of Tom Brennan, his scarred face reflecting satisfaction mixed with concern. "We've secured the town," he reported. "Harlan's surviving men have agreed to testify about their orders. Most of them had no idea they were following illegal commands." "What about casualties?" Finch asked. 3 townspeople wounded, none seriously. 5 soldiers dead, including Harlan. Could have been much worse." "It will be worse if Whitman gets here with the militia," Lucia warned. "We need to move fast." As they prepared to send their telegram to Sherman, Nietzsche emerged from the desert where he'd been keeping watch. The Apache scout's face was troubled. "Riders coming," he reported. "Not soldiers. Apache war party, maybe 20 warriors." Cole felt his stomach drop. "Hostile? Don't know. They're flying a truce flag, but..." Nietzsche shrugged. "Apache don't usually negotiate with white settlements. Unless they have a specific reason," Lucia said thoughtfully. "What if they've heard about what happened here, about Harlan's death?" The possibility had occurred to Cole as well. If the Apache had been receiving information from Harlan's network, they might be as confused by recent events as everyone else. "Only one way to find out," he said, checking his gun. "Let's go meet them." The Apache war party waited at the edge of town, their horses restless in the afternoon heat. Their leader was a man Cole recognized, Victorio, a respected war chief, who had been fighting the territorial government for over a decade. "Victorio," Cole said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "You're a long way from your usual territory." "As are you, Cole Maddox," the war chief replied in excellent English. "We heard there was fighting here. Heard that Captain Harlan was dead." "He is, along with his conspiracy." Victorio's weathered face showed surprise. "You know about the conspiracy. We know everything. About the weapons sales, the information trading, the orchestrated raids." Cole gestured toward Lucia, who was approaching with some of Sister Graciela's documents. "We have proof." The war chief examined the papers, his expression growing darker with each page. "This explains much," he said finally. "We always wondered how the soldiers knew our movements so well, how they anticipated our raids. Because Harlan was selling them information," Lucia said, "playing both sides against each other for profit. And now we're trying to expose the entire network. But we need help getting evidence to Washington before the territorial governor can silence us." Victorio was quiet for a long moment, considering. "There is a debt," he said finally. Sister Graciela saved many Apache lives over the years. She treated our sick, helped our wounded, showed us kindness when others showed only hatred. She was a good woman, Cole agreed. Yes, and her death demands justice. Victorio turned to his warriors, speaking rapidly in Apache. Then he turned back to Cole. We will escort your messenger to the railroad at Tucson. No territorial militia will dare attack a party under Apache protection. The offer was unexpected but welcome. With Apache warriors as guides and guards, they could get their evidence to Sherman without fear of interception. Who will carry the message? Morrison asked. I will, Lucia replied immediately. It's my responsibility, my sister's legacy. Too dangerous, Cole protested. If something happens to you, if something happens to me, the evidence still reaches Washington. That's what matters. Lucia's storm blue eyes were resolute. This is what Graciela would have wanted. As they prepared for the dangerous journey to Tucson, Cole found himself saying goodbye to a woman who had become far more important to him than he'd expected. The possibility that he might never see her again was almost unbearable. Come back, he said simply. I will, she promised. And when I do, we'll finish what your sister started. As Lucia rode away into the desert with her Apache escort, Cole turned his attention back to Sanctuary. The town was damaged, but not broken, and its people had learned something valuable about the power of truth over lies. But he knew their real test was still to come. Governor Whitman wouldn't give up easily, and there were still members of the conspiracy who would kill to protect their secrets. The storm had passed, but the reckoning was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Cole stood on the platform of the Tucson Railroad station, waiting for the morning train from the east. Telegraph messages from Washington had been encouraging Sherman had received their evidence and was taking action against the conspiracy. But Cole wouldn't believe it was truly over until he saw Lucia again. The train appeared as a distant speck against the desert horizon, its smoke trail rising straight up in the still air. As it pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a hiss of steam, Cole found himself holding his breath. Lucia was among the first passengers to disembark, but she wasn't alone. A tall, weathered man in a general's uniform followed her onto the platform, William Tecumseh Sherman himself, his steely eyes taking in everything around him with military precision. Mr. Maddox, Sherman said, extending his hand. Miss Morales has told me a great deal about you. General, Cole replied, shaking the offered hand. Is it over? Governor Whitman is in federal custody, along with 17 of his Confederates, Sherman said with satisfaction. The conspiracy you exposed reached higher than we imagined all the way to certain members of Congress, but it's been thoroughly rooted out. And the Apache. Chief Victorio has agreed to a peace treaty. Real peace this time, not the manipulated conflict that Harlan's network was perpetuating. Sherman's weathered face cracked in something that might have been a smile. Turns out that when you remove the people who profit from war, peace becomes possible. They rode back to Sanctuary in Sherman's private car, a luxury that seemed surreal after weeks of hiding in tunnels and fighting for their lives. Lucia sat beside Cole, her storm blue eyes reflecting a peace he hadn't seen before. What happens now, he asked her. And now we rebuild, she replied. The territorial government, the trust between settlers and Apache, the faith that justice is possible. And personally, Lucia was quiet for a moment, looking out at the desert landscape flowing past the train windows. I've been offered a promotion, head of the new Territorial Justice Department, based in Phoenix, responsible for preventing the kind of corruption that killed Graciela. That's a big job. Too big for one person. I'll need deputies, people I can trust. She turned to look at him directly. Interested, Cole felt his heart skip a beat. What about my ranch, my life here? What about justice? What about finishing what we started? Before he could answer, Sherman interrupted. Mr. Maddox, Miss Morales, has recommended you for the position of Deputy Marshal, Northern District. It would mean traveling throughout the territory, investigating corruption, protecting the innocent. It would mean leaving everything I've built, Cole said. Everything you've built on lies, Lucia corrected gently. This is a chance to build something real, something honest. Cole looked out at the desert, thinking about the past 12 years of his life. The guilt, the loneliness, the weight of secrets that had nearly crushed him. Then he thought about the past few weeks, the terror and violence, yes, but also the sense of purpose, the feeling that he was finally doing something worthwhile. When do I start? He asked. The train pulled into Sanctuary, just as the sun was setting, painting the adobe buildings gold and red in the fading light. The town looked different, somehow. Cleaner, more hopeful. The weight of old secrets had been lifted, replaced by the possibility of a better future. As they walked through the streets, Cole was struck by the changes. The people he passed didn't look at him with the mixture of respect and wariness he'd grown accustomed to. Instead, they nodded with genuine friendship, the kind that came from shared struggle and mutual trust. Sheriff Finch was waiting at the jail, a telegram in his hand, and a smile on his weathered face. "Welcome back," he said. "Got some news you'll want to hear?" "Good news or bad news?" Lucia asked. "Good. Captain Morrison's been promoted to colonel, put in charge of the new Territorial Security Division. And Tom Brennan's been appointed as the new sheriff here in Sanctuary." "What about you?" Cole asked. Finch's smile widened. "Turns out there's a town in New Mexico that needs an experienced lawman. Someone who understands the cost of corruption and won't be tempted by easy money." As they talked, Naichi emerged from the evening shadows, moving with his characteristic silent grace. The Apache scout carried news of his own. "The tribal council has chosen me as liaison to the new territorial government," he said. "I will help ensure that the peace treaty is honored by both sides." "A busy man," Cole observed. "A hopeful man," Naiche corrected. "For the first time in many years, there is real hope for peace between our peoples." They gathered that evening in the schoolhouse, which Martha Henley had converted into a temporary community center. The teacher had prepared a feast to celebrate their victory, and the entire population of Sanctuary turned out to honor the people who had saved their town. As Cole looked around the room, at faces he'd known for years, but was only now seeing clearly, he felt a profound sense of completion. The guilt that had haunted him for 12 years was finally gone, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten. Existed peace. "You know," Lucia said, sitting beside him at the long table, "Graciela would have loved this." "Would she?" "She always believed that truth would triumph over lies, that good people would eventually find the courage to do what's right." Lucia's storm-blue eyes reflected the lamplight. "She would have been proud of what we accomplished." "What you accomplished," Cole corrected. "I just helped clean up my own mess." "You did more than that. You chose to be a better man than the one you were before." As the evening wore on, Cole found himself on the schoolhouse porch, looking up at the stars that blazed across the clear desert sky. The same stars that had looked down on Sister Graciela's murder 12 years earlier, that had witnessed the birth and growth of the conspiracy that nearly destroyed the territory. But they were also the stars that had guided them to the truth that had illuminated the path to justice and redemption. "Second thoughts?" Lucia asked, joining him on the porch. "About the job, no. About everything else, maybe." "Such as?" Cole turned to look at her, seeing not just the trained operative or the grieving sister, but the woman who had become the most important person in his world. "Such as whether a man with my past has any right to hope for a future." Lucia stepped closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. "We all have pasts, Cole. The question isn't whether we deserve forgiveness, it's whether we're brave enough to accept it. And if I am, then maybe we can build something together, something real and honest and good." As they stood together under the desert stars, Cole felt the last of his ghosts finally lay down to rest. The storm that had torn through Sanctuary months earlier had destroyed more than buildings and exposed more than bones. It had torn away the lies and pretense that had poisoned the territory for years, exposing the truth that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. In the distance, a train whistle sounded across the desert, and the night express heading east toward new territories, new opportunities, new beginnings. Tomorrow, Cole and Lucia would board a similar train, beginning their work as federal marshals, tasked with ensuring that the corruption they'd fought so hard to expose could never take root again. But tonight they stood together in the place where their journey had begun, surrounded by friends who had become family, and united by a purpose that transcended their individual pasts. 6 months later, Cole received a letter that brought news of one final surprise. It was postmarked from a small town in California, signed by a name he'd thought he'd never see again, Captain Eli Harlan. But as he read the letter, Cole realized that the signature was a forgery, the handwriting belonging to someone else entirely. Someone who had been watching their investigation from the beginning. Someone who had helped orchestrate events from the shadows. The real Captain Harlan died 3 years ago. The letter read, "The man you killed in the cave was an imposter, a hired gun who took his name and identity. The true leader of the conspiracy. The shepherd is still alive. Still watching. Still waiting." Cole showed the letter to Lucia, watching her storm-blue eyes harden with determination. "It's not over," she said. "Well, no," Cole agreed. "But we're ready for whatever comes next." As they prepared to track down this new threat, Cole realized that their work would never truly be finished. There would always be corruption to fight injustice, to oppose truth, to defend. But they would face these challenges together, strengthened by their shared commitment to the ideals that Sister Graciela had died defending. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility of endings that were also beginnings. In a small cemetery outside Sanctuary, wildflowers bloomed on a nun's grave, tended by people who remembered her sacrifice and honored her legacy. Justice, Cole had learned, wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration. Not just of law and order, but of faith in the idea that good people could make a difference if they were willing to try. Sister Graciela had been willing to try, and she had died for it. But her death had not been in vain. It had planted seeds that were now growing into something beautiful and strong, a future where truth mattered more than profit. Where justice was more important than convenience. Where people like Cole Maddox could find redemption through service to others. The truth always found a way to the light. And sometimes, if people were very lucky, it brought healing along with it. As Cole and Lucia rode out of Sanctuary toward their next assignment, the morning sun painted the desert in shades of gold and promise. Behind them, the town was already rebuilding its people, united by the knowledge that they had faced the darkness and emerged into the light. Ahead lay new challenges, new mysteries to solve, new wrongs to right. But whatever came next, they would face it together, two damaged souls who had found redemption in each other and in their shared commitment to justice. The storm was over. The healing had begun. And in the vast expanse of the American frontier, hope was rising like the desert sun, bright and unstoppable and eternal.